Emma Johnson clutched her first-class boarding pass tightly as she approached the priority lane. After 3 exhausting days speaking at a major medical conference, all she wanted was to settle into her seat and rest before returning to her hospital. The airport was busy that afternoon. People rushed in all directions with their luggage. Children cried. Announcements echoed through the terminal. Emma had gone through this routine many times before. As one of the country's top heart surgeons, she traveled often for medical conferences. "Excuse me, ma'am," the gate agent said, stepping in front of her. "This lane is for first-class passengers only." Emma took a deep breath. This had happened before. "I am in first class," she replied, showing her boarding pass. The gate agent, a man named Oliver, barely glanced at it. "There must be some mistake. Could you please join the general boarding line?" Emma noticed how several white passengers walked through the priority lane without being stopped. She felt the familiar burn of frustration rising in her chest. "There's no mistake," Emma insisted firmly. "Please check my boarding pass properly." Oliver frowned. "Ma'am, I've been working this gate for years. I know what first-class tickets look like." Emma stood taller. At 5'4", she wasn't physically imposing, but she had learned to command respect through her presence. "And I've been flying first class for years. Please look at my ticket." People began to notice the exchange. Some passengers slowed down to watch. Others pretended not to see while stealing glances. "Is there a problem?" asked an older woman who had been waiting behind Emma. "No problem," Emma replied calmly. "Just a misunderstanding that will be cleared up soon." Oliver seemed uncomfortable with the growing attention. He finally looked at Emma's ticket properly. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her name with the title doctor before it. "You're a doctor?" he asked with surprise in his voice. "Yes, I am," Emma replied. "Chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Royal Hospital." Oliver's demeanor changed slightly, but he still seemed doubtful. "Medical doctors typically have documentation. Do you have any ID to verify that?" Emma felt her patience wearing thin. She had worked too hard and overcome too many obstacles to be treated this way. Still, she kept her composure as she reached into her handbag and pulled out her hospital ID. "Here you are," she said, handing it to him. Oliver studied the ID card carefully. The photo clearly showed Emma in her white coat. The credentials listed her position and qualifications. "I see," he said finally. "But there still seems to be an issue with your boarding pass." By now, a small crowd had formed. The boarding process was being delayed. Some passengers began to complain. "What's the holdup?" a businessman called out. Emma remained calm. "There's no issue with my boarding pass. I'm a first-class passenger and a platinum member of your airline's loyalty program. I've been flying with you for over 10 years. She pulled out her platinum membership card from her wallet and showed it to Oliver. A second gate agent, a woman named Helen, approached. "Is everything all right here, Oliver?" "This lady claims she has a first-class ticket," Oliver said. "I don't claim anything," Emma corrected him. "I have a first-class ticket, which I purchased, and which entitles me to board through this lane." Helen took the boarding pass from Oliver and examined it. "This is indeed a first-class ticket, Oliver." Oliver's face reddened. "I just wanted to make sure." "That what?" Emma asked. "That I belonged there? Would you have checked so thoroughly if I looked different?" The question hung in the air. Several passengers nodded in agreement. Helen looked embarrassed. "Dr. Johnson, please accept our apologies for the delay. You're free to board now." Emma nodded and moved forward, but she was stopped by yet another staff member, the flight supervisor. He had been watching the scene unfold from a distance. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone suggesting that Emma was the source of the disruption. Emma sighed. This was turning into a much bigger ordeal than it should have been. All she had tried to do was board a plane in the seat she had paid for. "Ask your gate agents," she replied. "They seem confused about whether I belong in first class." Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight every day, but standing up for yourself is always worth it. The flight supervisor, a tall man named Richard, took Emma's boarding pass and studied it with exaggerated care. His eyes moved from the ticket to Emma's face several times, as if trying to find something that didn't match. "Dr. Johnson? You're a doctor?" The doubt in his voice was clear. He said the word doctor as if it were a costume Emma was wearing for Halloween. "I am," Emma replied firmly. "Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Royal Hospital." She pulled out her medical ID and her platinum frequent flyer card. "And I'm also a top-tier member with your airline. I fly with you at least twice a month." Richard examined her ID with the same suspicion. By now, the line behind Emma had grown longer. People were checking their watches and sighing loudly. "This is ridiculous," said an older white woman behind Emma. "I've never seen anyone's credentials checked so thoroughly just to board a plane." Richard ignored the comment. "And what brings you to London today, Dr. Johnson?" Emma took a deep breath. "I was a keynote speaker at the International Cardiac Surgery Conference. Not that it should matter for my right to board this plane." A few more passengers voiced their support for Emma. "Just let her board already. We're all going to miss our connections at this rate." Richard seemed unmoved. "We have procedures we need to follow, and..." "Procedures?" Emma interrupted. "Is it your procedure to question only certain passengers about their right to be in first class? Because I've been watching for the past 10 minutes, and you haven't stopped anyone else." Richard's face reddened. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job." "It's doctor," Emma corrected. "And if you were just doing your job, you would have verified my boarding pass and let me through, just like you did for everyone else." The crowd had grown larger. Some people had taken out their phones and were recording the exchange. Emma noticed that several were pointed at Richard and the gate agents, not at her. "This isn't going to look good on social media," someone muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Richard finally seemed to realize the situation was escalating beyond his control. He handed back Emma's documents. "There seems to be some confusion here," he said stiffly. "The only confusion," Emma replied, "is why I'm being treated differently from other first-class passengers." Just then, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit stepped forward from the crowd. "Excuse me," he said. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm James Williams, a lawyer specializing in discrimination cases." He handed Richard his business card. "I'd be very interested to hear the airline's explanation for this treatment." Richard stared at the card, then back at Emma, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "We have the right to verify passenger credentials," he insisted, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Of course you do," James replied smoothly. "But you also have an obligation to apply those verification procedures equally to all passengers, regardless of their appearance." Emma was grateful for the support but frustrated that it took a white male lawyer's intervention to be taken seriously. A third gate agent, a young woman named Beth, joined the group. She looked at Emma and then at the growing crowd of annoyed passengers. "Richard, perhaps we should." She was interrupted by the arrival of another airline employee, this one wearing a different uniform. It was the lead flight attendant coming to check on the boarding delay. "What's going on?" "We're falling behind schedule," she said, looking concerned. Richard began to explain, but Emma cut in. "I'm being prevented from boarding in my assigned class, and no one will properly check my credentials without questioning my profession and my purpose for traveling." The flight attendant looked at Emma's boarding pass, then at Richard with confusion. "This is a valid first-class ticket. What's the issue?" Richard started to speak, but the lawyer cut in. "The issue appears to be that Dr. Johnson doesn't fit someone's idea of what a first-class passenger or a cardiac surgeon should look like." The flight attendant's eyes widened as she looked back at Emma. "Wait a minute. Dr. Emma Johnson? From Royal Hospital?" Emma nodded, surprised at the recognition. "My brother had heart surgery there last year. Your team saved his life." The flight attendant turned to Richard and the other gate agents. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Dr. Johnson is one of the top heart surgeons in the country. The weight of others' expectations should never define who we are or what we can achieve. The that atmosphere at the gate shifted dramatically. The flight attendant, Lucy, beamed at Emma with genuine admiration in her eyes. "Dr. Johnson?" Lucy exclaimed, her face lighting up. "Is that really you?" Emma looked at Lucy more carefully, trying to place her face. Then recognition dawned on her. "Lucy? From Flight 372 last year?" Lucy nodded excitedly and turned to the gate crew. "This is Dr. Johnson. She saved a passenger's life on my flight last year." The other passengers leaned in, suddenly interested in this new development. Richard and the other gate agents looked confused. "What happened?" someone in the crowd asked. Lucy was eager to tell the story. "We were flying from London to New York. About 3 hours into the flight, an older man collapsed in the aisle. He wasn't breathing properly and his face was turning blue." Emma remembered that day clearly. She had been sleeping when the urgent call for a doctor came over the plane's speakers. "I made an announcement asking if there was a doctor on board," Lucy continued. Dr. Johnson immediately responded. She didn't hesitate for a second. Richard was now listening intently, the boarding pass still in his hand. "The man was having a severe cardiac emergency," Lucy explained. "Dr. Johnson worked on him for nearly an hour with just our basic medical kit." She was so calm, giving us instructions, telling us exactly what she needed. Emma remembered how the man's wife had clutched her hand, begging her to save him. She had been married to him for 42 years, she'd said. "We had to make an emergency landing in Iceland," Lucy went on. Dr. Johnson stayed with the passenger the entire time, monitoring his condition. "The paramedics who met us said if she hadn't been on that flight, he wouldn't have survived until we landed." The crowd had grown silent, hanging on Lucy's every word. "The airline gave Dr. Johnson an award for her actions," Lucy said. "There was an article about it in our company newsletter. She was even invited to our headquarters to be thanked personally by our CEO." Emma hadn't wanted any recognition. She had simply done what any doctor would do. But the airline had insisted on acknowledging her quick thinking and skill that had saved a life at 35,000 feet. "I was just doing my job," Emma said quietly. An older man in the crowd spoke up. "My wife is a nurse. She always says that just doing your job in medicine often means the difference between life and death for someone." Lucy nodded enthusiastically. "The passenger, Mr. Thompson, sends Dr. Johnson a Christmas card every year. He calls her his guardian angel." Richard was now looking at Emma with new eyes. The suspicion was gone, replaced by something that looked like embarrassment. "Dr. Johnson," he began, his voice softer than before. "I had no idea that I was qualified to sit in first class?" Emma finished for him. "That's precisely the problem, isn't it? You didn't know anything about me, but you made assumptions based on what you saw." Richard had the grace to look ashamed. "The article in the newsletter. I think I remember it now. But the photo was taken from a distance, and you didn't expect the doctor to look like me," Emma said. The words hung in the air, simple but powerful. A woman in the crowd called out, "This is exactly what happens to my daughter all the time. She's a professor at Oxford, but people always assume she's a student or assistant." Others began to share similar stories. The moment had touched a nerve for many passengers who had experienced similar treatment. Lucy turned to Richard. "Dr. Johnson is one of our airline's most valued customers. She flies with us constantly for medical conferences and surgical consultations all over the world." Emma was touched by Lucy's defense, but she was also tired. All she had wanted was to board her flight and get some rest. "May I board now?" she asked Richard directly. He nodded quickly, handing back her boarding pass and ID. "Of course, Dr. Johnson. Right away." As Emma began to move toward the jet bridge, Lucy walked alongside her. "I'm so sorry about this, Dr. Johnson. Mr. Thompson asks about you whenever I see him. He named his new grandson after you, well, the male version. They call him Emmett. Emma smiled for the first time since arriving at the gate. That's very sweet. How is he doing? Fantastic. He's back to playing golf and walking his dog 5 miles every day. He says he's living on borrowed time, and he's making the most of it. Sometimes, it takes one person to recognize our value when others fail to see it. The end Richard's face had turned pale. He looked at the other gate agents, who were now avoiding his eyes. The crowd of waiting passengers had grown, and many were openly discussing what they had just witnessed. Dr. Johnson, I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding, Richard stammered. His voice had lost all its previous authority. Please, allow me to escort you personally to your seat. Emma stood tall, her dignity intact. She was only 5'4", but in that moment, she seemed much taller. This wasn't a misunderstanding, she said clearly. This was an assumption based on how I look, not who I am. The passengers around her nodded in agreement. Some were still recording the scene on their phones. I've flown first class on this airline 73 times in the past 2 years, Emma continued. I've earned that privilege through my work and my loyalty to your company. Yet today, I was made to feel like I didn't belong. Richard looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. Again, Dr. Johnson, I am truly sorry. He was interrupted by an older gentleman who stepped forward from the crowd. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with natural authority. Excuse me, he said. I'm William Davies, on the airline's board of directors. He showed his ID to prove it. And I've witnessed this entire interaction. Dr. Johnson is right. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was bias, plain and simple. Richard's face went from pale to ashen. The other gate agents looked equally horrified. William Davies turned to Emma. Dr. Johnson, on behalf of the airline, I want to apologize for the treatment you've received today. This is not what we stand for as a company. Emma hadn't expected to find an airline director witnessing the incident. But she wasn't interested in getting anyone fired. She wanted something more meaningful to come from this experience. Mr. Davies, she said, I don't want apologies. I want change. This happens to people who look like me every day, in airports, restaurants, stores, and hospitals. Most don't have the titles or credentials to force others to acknowledge their dignity. William Davies nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right, Dr. Johnson. And I believe you're in a unique position to help us address this issue. By now, the boarding process had completely stalled. The other passengers were listening intently to the conversation. How so? Emma asked. Our company has been working on improving our diversity training, but clearly, it's not enough. Would you consider consulting with us? Help us develop a more effective program based on real experiences like yours? Emma hadn't expected this turn of events. She had planned to file a formal complaint once she got home, but this was a chance to create systemic change from within. I would consider it, she said carefully. But only if you're serious about making real changes, not just trying to avoid bad publicity. William Davies nodded firmly. I'm completely serious. In fact, I'd like to upgrade you to our chairman's suite for your flight today and arrange a meeting with our CEO when we land. An older woman in the crowd called out, make sure you pay her for her expertise. Don't expect free consulting just because she experienced discrimination. There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd. William Davies smiled. Of course. Dr. Johnson's time and expertise are valuable. We would establish a proper consulting arrangement. Richard, who had been standing awkwardly throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. Dr. Johnson, please allow me to escort you to the plane now. The flight crew has been notified of the situation, and they're waiting to welcome you properly. Emma looked at Richard. I appreciate that. But first, I want to be clear about something. She spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. What happened today wasn't just about me. It happens to countless people every day who don't have directors or lawyers or medical degrees to validate their worth. Remember that. Richard nodded solemnly. "I will, Dr. Johnson. I promise." As Emma finally moved toward the jet bridge, passengers began to applaud. Some reached out to touch her arm or shoulder in support. A young black girl, about 12 years old, looked at Emma with wide, admiring eyes. "I want to be a doctor too," she whispered as Emma passed. Emma smiled at her. "You can be. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The truth, when spoken with dignity, has the power to change hearts and minds. The END 3 months later, Emma stood in a large training room at the airline's headquarters. The walls were covered with colorful posters about respect and inclusion. 20 employees sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle, watching her intently. Among them were Richard and the other gate agents who had tried to block her boarding that day. Emma had been nervous about seeing them again. Not because she feared them, but because she didn't want them to feel ashamed. This wasn't about shame, it was about growth. "Good morning, everyone," Emma began. "Thank you for being here today. 3 months ago, I had an experience at one of your gates that changed my life and, I hope, will change yours too." After the incident, William Davies had kept his promise. The airline had invited Emma to help develop a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all customer-facing staff. Richard and his team had been among the first to volunteer. "What happened to me that day happens to countless individuals every day," Emma explained. "The difference is that I had credentials they couldn't ultimately ignore and a dramatic story that made them listen. Most people don't have that advantage." A woman in the front row raised her hand. "Dr. Johnson, I've worked for this airline for 15 years. I always thought I treated everyone the same. But after hearing about your experience, I started watching myself more carefully. I was shocked by what I noticed." Emma nodded encouragingly. That self-awareness is the first step toward change. Richard, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "I want to share something, if that's okay." His voice was different from the day at the gate, softer, more thoughtful. "Of course," Emma said. "After what happened with Dr. Johnson, I couldn't sleep for days," Richard admitted. "I kept replaying the incident in my mind, trying to justify my actions. But eventually, I had to face the truth. I wouldn't have questioned a white man in a suit the same way." The room was silent. Some people looked uncomfortable, but others were nodding in recognition. That realization was painful, Richard continued. "I've always seen myself as a good person. To accept that I acted with bias was hard. But it was also freeing, because now I can work on it." Emma smiled at him. "Thank you for sharing that, Richard. Recognition is courageous, and it's the beginning of transformation." Over the past 3 months, Emma had helped design a program that went beyond the usual corporate training videos. Employees participated in role-playing exercises where they experienced being stereotyped based on random characteristics. They listened to first-hand accounts from passengers who had faced discrimination. They learned to recognize their own biases and practiced interrupting them. "The most important thing to understand," Emma told the group, "is that this isn't about being politically correct. It's about seeing each person's full humanity. It's about looking past your first assumptions." A young man raised his hand. "I'm new to the company. I wasn't here when the incident happened. But my mother faces this kind of thing all the time. She's a university professor, but people often mistake her for the cleaning staff." Emma nodded. "And how does that make her feel?" "Tired," he said simply. "Just really tired of having to constantly prove herself." "Exactly," Emma replied. "That exhaustion affects people's health, their work, their relationships. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a burden that some people carry every day." As the training session continued, Emma could see understanding dawning on faces throughout the room. This wasn't just about rules or policies, it was about recognizing the deeply human impact of bias and everyday prejudice. At the end of the session, William Davies joined them. He had a surprise announcement. "Thanks to Dr. Johnson's guidance, this training program will now be mandatory for all 47,000 of our employees worldwide. Additionally, we're implementing new systems to track and address bias incidents, and we're creating a passenger advisory council to help us continue improving." The room broke into spontaneous applause. Emma felt a warm sense of satisfaction. The incident that had begun as yet another humiliating experience had transformed into a catalyst for meaningful change. As people began to leave, Richard approached Emma. "Dr. Johnson, I know it doesn't erase what happened, but I want you to know that you've changed how I see the world. I'm teaching my kids what I've learned here." Emma smiled. "That might be the most important outcome of all, Richard. When we transform our pain into purpose, we create ripples of change that reach far beyond ourselves." The end.